So, the title of the article I chose is Effective Wi-Fi Radiation on Seed Germination and Plant Growth. So basically what they did was they had two bowls which they had planted garden cress seeds in. They placed one bowl next to a Wi-Fi router. They placed the other bowl away from the router, and after 12 days they saw that the plant next to the router was not as tall, it looked weaker, it was discolored, while the other plant that was placed away from the router grew up to be normal. The abstract of the paper did an okay job. It did discuss the methods and goals of the study, but it didn't really say anything about the results or the conclusion. There was no hypothesis in the introduction. They did mention two previous studies that were about micro radiation and food and radiation with animals, but nothing about plants. So the hypothesis of this article is set in previous research. The paper is organized okay. It only talks about relevant information in each section for the most part. It can be kind of confusing in some places, but for the most part, I think I understood what they were trying to say. I do not think that I could replicate this study. They mentioned procedures that they did, but they didn't really talk about any exact measurements for any of them. So I don't know how much water I would need to put in the plants. I don't know how many hours of sunlight that they got. I don't know the distance between the router and the plant that they used, so it was a little iffy on that part. I would say the results are clearly stated. They talk about each plant on certain days that they took measurements, and they show what was going on with the plant that day in terms of how it looked, how it was growing. So I would say that that part's okay. The data and the tables, they were pretty good. They had pictures of the plants on the days that they took all the measurements, and they compared each one and showed how each one was doing. They actually did not use any statistical tests in this study. They simply took measurements and compared the two plants, but yeah, no test at all. The conclusions are supported by the data. The plant that was next to the router, seemingly the only difference was the location. So the plant that was next to the router did not grow as well. For their references, they used a numbering system. And on one part, they just simply say 1 through 7, and then you have to go down to the reference section and find references 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which I thought was pretty odd. They did not use the standard listing the author's name and the source material. I would say the paper is somewhat concise. They get the point across of what the study is supposed to be doing, but there's definitely some parts I was a little confused on in terms of why they were mentioning it. I do believe that most of the terms used in this paper were used correctly, but the biggest problem with this paper, in my opinion, was the grammar, the sentence structure. It was not a very well written paper. If I were a peer reviewer, I would not be confident in having this article be published because while the information is pretty interesting, and I think, studying the effects of radiation on plants could be useful, the grammar is just so bad in this paper that I do not think it's worth reading even with the interesting information.